They say you should never judge a book by its cover, but I haven't heard anyone say you shouldn't judge a guitarist by their guitar. Not that I'd be able to hear them over the sound of my own mangled power chords ripping through 100 watts of neighbor-aggravating amplification. But even if I did hear someone tell me not to judge a guitarist by his or her instrument, I'd tell them to go suck a big fat dropped D. Why? Because thousands of you have asked me to make a part 2 to my What Your Electric Guitar Says About You video. You heard all the nice things I had to say about the people who play those 10 guitars, and felt left out because I didn't mention you in your precious little acts, because it's probably not worth mentioning. But maybe I'll mention it in this one. Here's 10 more. Number 1, Gibson Explorer. If you bought one of these overpriced pieces of shit, it tells me you didn't explore enough of Guitar Center. Did you not see the Les Pauls and SGs on the wall? Because they're in the same price range and made by the same brand, but look, sound, and feel 10 times better. No one who owns a Gibson Explorer is an actual explorer. Don't kid yourself. You ain't no Dora. The only reason you bought this guitar is because you've seen people like James Hetfield, Dave Grohl, and The Edge playing them. That doesn't make you an explorer. It makes you a follower like 99% of the other people who own this guitar. A more accurate name for this guitar would have been something like the Gibson Bystander or the Gibson I'll stay back while you go see what's up ahead. Because the only thing you'll be exploring is where in the house you're going to store this heavy, ugly, useless piece of shit guitar. Number 2, Epiphone Explorer. The only thing that says, please don't notice me more than a Gibson Explorer is an Epiphone Explorer. Between its boring design, limited tonal range, and the fact that it's so heavy you can't move around while playing one on stage, the Explorer draws so little attention, it actually draws negative attention. I swear it's like magic with this guitar. The second you pick one up, I instantly stop noticing you're there, and so does everybody else. At least with a guy playing a Gibson Explorer, you'll be like, look, that guy's playing a Gibson, and acknowledge his existence. But then again, he paid like 9 times more for the name brand, even though 9 out of 10 guitarists can't tell the difference between playing a Gibson Explorer and an Epiphone Explorer. Nor can the casual listener tell the difference between the way they sound, since they both sound like shit. If I owned a Gibson or an Epiphone Explorer, I'd be exploring the quickest way to get rid of it. If you own a Gibson or Epiphone Explorer, I'd start exploring the possibility of switching to another instrument because you obviously have terrible taste in electric guitars. Number 3, Paul Reed Smith guitars. In 1985, a Gibson employee named Paul Smith left the company to start his own because he felt that quality guitars were too expensive for the average player to be able to afford. But since he priced his guitars just as high as American-made Fenders and Gibsons, the average player couldn't afford a Paul Reed Smith either. So, for decades, the only people who owned them were doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and other above-average earners. This led to the perception that Paul Reed Smith players were prissy, snooty, stuck-up squares. Then, when several bands in the pussy rock genre like Nickelback, Creed, and Three Doors Down started playing them, the reputation of PRS players got even worse. To say they were considered uncool would be a massive understatement. Even people who played Epiphones and Squiers got made fun of less. Then, in the early 2000s, Paul Reed Smith introduced their SE line of guitars, which were much more affordable. You no longer had to be in the upper class to be able to afford a Paul Reed Smith. Now the upper middle class could afford them too. So every Alex Lifeson fan from the Hamptons to the Hills bought one. Not to actually play, but to brag about on Reddit to people like me who play unsophisticated guitars like Strats and Les Pauls. But owning a Paul Reed Smith doesn't make you sophisticated. It makes you an asshole. A highly noticeable asshole too, because those guitars are shiny as shit. You might think you're better than everyone else because you've got birds on your fretboard, but we're the ones who'll be flying away when you ask us to jam with you. Number 4, BC Rich Warlocks, bitches, ironbirds, etc. These weapons of mass distortion exist for one reason: to play loud, fast metal. Or, more accurately, to make whoever's holding it look like they play loud, fast metal. Because no guitar looks more metal than a BC Rich. That's the whole point. Just be careful not to slice yourself open on one of the many sharp points sticking out of your Warlock, Ironbird, or BC Rich bitch, which, since everything has to be pussified now, is just called the BC Rich B. Changing the name, what a bitch move. All 3 of these guitars have 24 jumbo frets and 6 strings. They also each have 6 sharp points, which is why you have 24 jumbo-sized cuts all over your body. But don't let the fact that you can't pick up one of these instruments without slicing yourself open slow you down. Nothing will make you look more metal than holding a BC Rich, which, let's be real, is why you bought one. If you wanted to sound metal, you would have bought a Jackson or an Ibanez. You bought your BC Rich solely for the way it looks. And it will get looks, just not always the looks you want. But when some snooty Paul Reed Smith player looks at you the wrong way, you can use your battle axe of a guitar to chop his in half. And I can't think of anything more metal than using an iron bird to hack up some rich kid's bird-covered fretboard. Number 5. Semi-hollow body guitars. Gibson ES series, several Gretsch models, etc. These guitars are great for people who are indecisive or afraid of commitment. Can't decide whether you want an electric guitar or an acoustic? No worries. Guitars like the Gibson ES 335 and Gretsch 6120 combine the worst elements of both into one unreasonably priced instrument. If you want a guitar that both electric and acoustic players can make fun of, a semi-hollow body guitar is the way to go. Acoustic players will make fun of you because your guitar is nearly as big as theirs, but since it's got a solid block of wood running through the center, you can barely hear it if it's not plugged in. Electric players will make fun of you because when you are plugged in, the hollow part of your guitar creates that weird acoustic echoey distortion that you love, but all other guitar players hate. If you own a semi-hollow body guitar, there's a good chance you play rockabilly, psychobilly, or a rockin' hillbilly, or just a psycho named Billy. Either that, or you play the blues because your soul is as hollow as the body of your guitar. But even all the warm, rich, resonant tones your semi-hollow guitar can produce will never be able to fill the dark, dry emptiness of your soul. Buying a different guitar might, though. Number 6. Double neck guitars. If you're looking for a heavy, awkward guitar that won't fit in any of your cases or gig bags and takes 4 hours to restring, good news. Such a monstrosity exists, and it's called a double neck guitar. These instruments are great for guitarists who want to be able to switch back and forth between sounding awful on 6 strings and sounding awful on 12, but are too lazy to simply bend over and swap guitars. Like Warlocks and Flying V's, double neck guitars are 99% just for show. Which is ironic, because you haven't shown me shit since you bought one. I mean, you talk about the guitar every time I come over, but you've yet to show me what it can do other than take up half your living room. You haven't even been able to show me that you figured out how to tune it correctly. The only thing you've shown me is that you paid double for a guitar that gets played half as much as your other one. No animal has 2 necks, and neither should any guitar. It's unnatural, just like the playing style you'll have to adopt to use your double neck. Jimmy Page might have looked kinda cool with his Gibson EDS 1275, but you just look awkward. Every time I see you pick up your double neck guitar, it makes me want to wrap both my hands around your single neck. That way my 2 eyes and 2 ears don't have to see and hear your 2 hands fumbling up and down your guitar's 2 fretboards. Number 7. Super strats. Charbel, Kramers, etc. The Fender Stratocaster is one of the most popular, iconic guitars of all time, played by everyone from Jimi Hendrix to the guy from Jimmy Eat World. But just because it's good enough for Hendrix doesn't mean it's good enough for you. Though you love the Stratocaster's sleek body, you need a guitar with more frets, a locking trim, and at least one humbucker, which is why you bought a Charbel Pro Mod, a Kramer Beretta, or some other guitar that looks like a Fender Stratocaster, but isn't a Fender Stratocaster. A Super Strat is any guitar with a classic Stratocaster body, but has a better neck, bridge, pickups, or other hardware. They're perfect for guitarists who want to get shreddy like Eddie while looking rock steady. It'd be like slapping the body of a Ford Focus onto a GT500. You wouldn't even notice the thing until its 700 horsepower engine fires up and the car tears down the street. Same with a Super Strat. Just sitting there, it blends in with all the other Stratocasters. But the second you start playing your Super Strat, it catches everyone's attention. That's because you play your Super Strat super loud and super fast, which all your neighbors find super obnoxious. They'd rather listen to the guy with a regular Strat across the street playing the same 5 classic rock songs over and over than listening to you cranking out 64th notes on your 7-string Schecter Omen or Charbel Angel. But just because the neighbors wish that you and your sleeper guitar would give it a rest doesn't mean you're going to, because there are no rests in the music you play, only 16th notes and up. Number 8. ESP guitars. If ESP guitars actually gave you extrasensory perception, maybe they'd be worth the money. But since you don't have ESP, you aren't able to sense how overpriced these guitars are. And even though the guy at Guitar Center doesn't have ESP either, he was able to perceive what a fool you are and convince you to buy one. You don't even need all 5 of your normal senses to tell that ESP guitars are basically just overpriced rip-offs of other guitars. Their lower-end options might be a little more affordable, but the quality and availability is quite limited. Maybe someday you'll come to your senses and trade your ESP Limited for the Fender or Gibson model it's a copy of. Hell, even an Epiphone LP would be better than a Limited EC. But as long as you continue to play an ESP Limited, you'll continue to be perceived as a guitarist of limited ability. Number 9. Dean ML. You don't have to be a cowboy from hell to own one of these metal-making monsters. Through a far beyond overdriven amp, your awkward display of power tells me 2 things about you as a guitarist. 1, you're a big Pantera fan. And 2, you look as stupid with your Dean ML as Dimebag looked cool with his. There should be a rule that you can't buy cool-looking guitars like Flying V's, BC Riches, and Dean XLs until you can demonstrate some level of proficiency with them. You want to buy a Flying V? You got to be able to play the solo from Flying High Again. You want a Dean XL? You got to be able to play at least 2 riffs off of each of the first 3 Pantera albums. Why? That way people like you who've barely been playing for 3 weeks and only discovered Pantera like fucking yesterday can't just have their rich stepdad go out and buy them one so they can look cool on Instagram. Some gates do need keeping. You might be fooling your private school friends, but you ain't fooling other guitar players. Posing with your Dean ML on Instagram isn't going to impress real guitarists. It's only going to make them fucking hostile. We know you're posting pics and not videos because if you tried to play Unbroken, it would sound like your guitar was broken. You need to walk away from the camera, pick up your goddamn electric, and start practicing the art of shredding until your guitar skills get to a new level. Because you haven't spent 5 minutes alone with your Dean ML since you got the thing. Number 10. Gibson Les Paul Junior. I still can't figure out why anyone would want to buy a regular Gibson Les Paul, let alone one of these smaller and shittier but nearly just as expensive Les Paul Juniors. I mean, if you're like a billionaire, I guess a Les Paul Junior might make a good gag gift to give one of your Fender-playing friends. Or if you've already got one of every single other guitar on the market and need a Les Paul Junior to complete your collection, I could maybe see buying one. But there's no reason why you should have bought one. We both know the truth. You didn't buy your Gibson Les Paul Junior because it sounds good or is comfortable to play. You bought it because it was the least complicated-looking guitar that had the name Gibson on it. Since the 2 pickups and 4 knobs on a regular Les Paul was too confusing for you, you went with a Les Paul Junior, essentially paying the same price for much less of a guitar. But just because your guitar's versatility and tone are limited doesn't mean you'll be limiting how much you brag about your Gibson Les Paul Junior. Although you somehow manage to leave out the Junior part every time you do. Yet, like all Gibson owners, you always feel the need to mention the brand name over and over again. Gibson should really only have one guitar model, and it should be called the Gibson, because people who own Gibsons love to hear the sound of that word coming out of their mouths almost as much as the rest of us hate to hear the sound coming from their amps. Just know that if you own a Gibson Les Paul Jr., us non-Gibson owning guitarists think even less of you than we do regular Gibson Les Paul owners. We still think more of you than Epiphone Les Paul owners, though. There, now all you whiny Paul Reed Smith lovers on TikTok can leave me the fuck alone. All you Warlock owners on YouTube can quit your BC Rich bitchin' that I didn't mention your beloved guitar. Because now I have mentioned it. Mentioned how much it sucks. But if I still haven't gotten around to mentioning your guitar, I'm sure you'll mention it in the comments. Just like I'm sure I'll eventually make a part 3, because I love talking shit about other guitarists from atop my high horse, while at the same time strumming my cheap Mexican Strat. Hey, somebody's got to keep gate.
You're so annoying.
If you want to hear some of my music that was recorded with none of the guitars in this video, click the link in the description or search for this dude on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you usually listen to music that wasn't recorded with any of the guitars in this video.